Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, whatever place you are joining us. We're very thankful for people who come in and joining us at our Peace Week. It's our biannual Peace Weeks where we meet as a Carter school community every year during the spring and during the fall in September, and discuss topics which are most interested for our faculty, for our alumni. It's a huge network which we're presenting here, and today I'm really happy to have here our Carter School faculties who work on different dimensions of environmental peace building. And environmental peace building, it's a very, as you will see today, is a very wide topic which bring together people from different disciplines, from different continents, but the most important, it has variety or continuum of work where a lot of people who work on climate change, ecologists, people working in science, dealing with the issues of environment, how they contribute to peace, to using a climate and environment to produce more peaceful relationships. So today we will see variety of practices, variety of theoretical approaches, which constitute the environmental peace building. So this section is really one of the ways for us to have a conversation what environmental peace building is, where we're going, what are perspective and prospects for it, and how we as a Carter School and our community of peace builders can contribute to its development and establish new practices and strategies on environmental peace building. So again, thank you for joining us. Before we start, I will ask all our presenters today to introduce themselves, and then we will have a round of conversation where every presenter will talk about hers or his work in environmental peace building, views on the future. Then we'll have one more round of comments between our presenters, and then we open it to comments and questions from our audience. Again, we're very thankful for you to be here with us today. And let's start introduction. Let's start, Sylvia.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. My name is Sylvia Daniela. I'm an incoming faculty at the Carter School and currently a postdoc at the Earth Commons Institute for Environment and Sustainability at Georgetown University.
Thank you. Ben?
Morning, everyone. I'm also delighted to be here and glad to see such a large crowd on this call. I am a historian. I'm an assistant professor, and I split my time between the history department at George Mason and the Carter School.
Thank you. Arthur?
Greetings, everyone. Good to see you. I'm Arthur Romano. I'm an associate professor at the Carter School and the director of our program on urban peace building.
Thank you, Jeff.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Helsing. I'm the director of the Better Evidence Project in the Carter School and also an associate professor.
And I'm Karina Korestelina. I'm professor at the Carter School. I'm a director of the Peace Lab on Reconciling Conflict Intergroup Division, and I'm also the chair of research committee for the Carter School. So I'm really happy to have this event here with all my hats, which I wear today. So again, as we discussed, we will start with really type campfire conversations about what practices our faculty use in the environmental peace building work. And we'll start with Sylvia.
Thank you so much again. So I want to take those few minutes to shed some light on environmental peace building as an emergent and somewhat imperfect practice in United Nations peace operations, Some of you know that I've been working on this, so I'm taking this opportunity for this panel to take this part of the work and open it up. I'll be focusing on renewable energy, and it's really just one snippet of what environmental peace building entails. And I think throughout this panel, we'll see the very diverse aspects that and dimensions that peace building, environmental peace building can take. So in my research, I have looked at how United Nations peace operations have built infrastructure, so public works, as part of the broader pursuit of peace. And today, with a growing interest in environmental and climate issues within the United Nations, of course, this hasn't left peacekeeping and peace building untouched. We see a specific and very interesting focus on specifically renewable energy. And that, of course, connects again to infrastructure work, and that's how it entered somewhat in my work. So as part of United Nations peace operations, the UN has committed itself to build renewable energy plants and entire electricity grids. On the one hand, to satisfy their own energy needs, it's an attempt at decarbonization, and also to provide electricity to local communities where the peacekeepers are stationed. Now, that's a significant departure of the UN's past infrastructure projects. The projects span a very long time frame, which is coherent with energy transitions in general that take decades rather than years. It also involves a multiplicity of actors. Think of local government and the private sector. And more generally, these projects are significantly more complex than what other infrastructure projects, like building a road, the UN has previously engaged in. Now, so these projects come with opportunities, but they also come with some limits, or let's say risks, both for the operations, but also for the local community. And looking at these, I think is a quite interesting starting point to think more broadly about some of what environmental peace building means, and also where research could potentially focus on in the future. So building infrastructure is an important vehicle to render tangible what peace looks like, this very abstract notion of peace, especially when societies are emerging or transitioning from war towards more peace. For the UN, building a project like a renewable power plant is a very direct way to engage in climate mitigation, to contribute to decarbonization of the United Nations and its peace operations, to reduce emissions in other ways, reduce pollution, and also to reduce fuels theft, which is still a quite important problem in emissions. So overall, it's an opportunity to leave a positive legacy. And of course, also it contributes to electrification for the local communities, which is a part of a local development strategy. And there are also links to peace here. On the other hand, if we look at it a bit critically, we can also say that actually the UN is participating in urban and regional planning, which is something that I've been studying in the past, and which is perhaps surprising because UN peacekeepers wouldn't necessarily be the actors to do such work. And so they shape local urban and infrastructure development, the urban fabric in the places in which they operate, and they do so through still a quite military paradigm of security. Right? The peacekeeper security concerns have a strong influence on the design and on the operation of infrastructure, on decisions like where to build a power plant, who is connected to the grid, etc. And so just as a word of perhaps warning, or as a way to sensitize and ask with what kind of baggage and with what kind of logics do peace building and peacekeeping actors arrive when they engage in such environmental peace building work. This word of caution is not meant to dismiss the UN's efforts to contribute to climate mitigation, by no means, but it's really to draw attention to the possible equity and sustainability concerns that can arise in such a context. So we need to ask a different set of questions that so far haven't been really addressed. And I think these questions can guide us more broadly when we think of the links between peace building and the environment. So when we engage in such projects as the UN, as peacebuilding, as peacekeepers, how much do such projects cater to the local immediate and long-term needs of different population groups, right? Which groups, urban, rural, different ethnicities, genders, tribal affiliations, how do they benefit from the new projects? Which groups might be further marginalized? And then also more technically, and still very much related to these broader political questions, can the infrastructure really be maintained and operated self-sufficiently once the UN leaves? What does the household actually require in order to be able to connect to the grid and benefit from such a project? And perhaps what resonates most with those that are familiar with conflict sensitivity, the ultimate question, of course, is what new divisions might emerge in the context of such a renewable energy project. So I find this focus on renewable energy within peacebuilding practice quite remarkable. For me, it's been an input for current and for future research on conflict sensitivity around renewable energy, infrastructure, and more broadly, this questions of energy transition. I'm exploring this right now in Morocco, and I'm thinking about future projects, including in Virginia, where this is also, close to home, quite an important issue. And so really, just as a last word here, within environmental peacebuilding, I think for a long time we have been looking at resources and this has a long history, but thinking about decarbonization, climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and especially the infrastructure aspect of this can be a source and a vehicle for environmental peacebuilding, but it comes with caveats. And I think that's where, at least from my point of view, this will be some of the research that I'm looking forward to work more on and to discuss more. So I'll leave it at this, and then we'll have more time to discuss.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ben, you're next.
Fantastic. Good morning again, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. And many thanks to you, Karina, for organizing this panel. Thanks to my fellow panelists and everyone in the audience again for coming. I'm just to reiterate, very excited to have this panel on environmental peacebuilding. I was at an earlier event on sort of visioning for thinking about what environmental peacebuilding is at the Carter School earlier this year. That was really exciting, and it's cool to see that work coming forward in this particular space. I think that attention to the environment in general is crucial to any aspect of building peace. And I also think that attention to environmental issues is always strengthened when it's brought into conversations with topics of peace and conflict. So in my brief comments this morning, I'll be coming from my own discipline, which is the discipline of history. I'll be wearing that hat. And what I want to do is raise a few ways that I think that historians and historical thinking can be useful in aiding the objectives of this panel and the broader project of thinking through environmental peacebuilding, namely to consider how issues of the environment and issues of peacebuilding can be united, can be further integrated. So just to quickly tell you a little bit about my own work, so you know where I'm coming from my own research. I'm primarily a historian of European and international history with attention to the modern era, especially in the 19th and 20th centuries. My own research focuses on the intersections of global history, environmental history, and the history of science and technology. I'm currently writing a book about the remarkable expansion of earth science in the decades after World War II, so especially in the 1950s and 1960s. And I'm working to understand how that history emerged out of, and at least I think in turn helped to shape some of the momentous transitions in international order that were characterized by some of these big sort of structural phenomena or changes, such as the Cold War, decolonization, and the rise of post-colonial economic globalization. So all this is to say that I'm deeply interested in the intersections of environment, peace, and war. And so I've really been looking forward to this panel, and I'm really excited to continue learning from the wisdom of my fellow panelists. So as I was thinking about what I could offer to this particular conversation, my thoughts turned especially to the disciplinary conventions of history and the methods that we historians use to understand both the environment and matters of peace building. In essence, I think we can think of history as a discipline that tries to think deeply about chronology and about theories of time. So there's sort of an initial prosaic point, I think, that can be made, which is that the past is always relevant for peace building. Any attempt to address the causes of conflict necessarily will be concerned with past harms. And just as there's always an inherently historical dimension to peace building in general, this, I think, holds for environmental peace building specifically. But there are also less obvious, but perhaps ultimately more important ways that practitioners of history as a discipline might contribute to this conversation. For instance, I think that historians could help disaggregate what we mean by the past in relation to environmental peace building. I don't think that having a simple, unified understanding of past events will be of absolute or particular even use to those engaged in addressing the environmental dimensions of conflict. Rather, it might be more useful to identify and study a range of historical trajectories moving at multiple speeds of relevance to any given case. The 20th century French historian Fernand Braudel famously argued back in the 1940s and 50s that history moves at multiple speeds. At the quickest level, there are the everyday sort of events that we're most familiar with and which constitute our social world. These would be meetings between people, the ups and downs of the stock market, elections, and so forth. Then there's a kind of intermediate layer of history comprised of deeper social processes, the kinds of things which nations and states are made of, that allow civilizations to rise and fall, or that facilitate the development of deeply channeled cultural trends. And then finally, at the slowest level of time, there's what Braudel called geographic or geological or environmental time. This is the time of natural history, the time of the longue durée. It is the slow geological time in which mountain ranges are formed, sea basins are filled, deserts turn into oases, or fertile fields transform into desolate plains. When Braudel wrote, which was by many decades ago by now, these scales of time seem to move at a more or less standardized set of speeds. The lifetime of a human could be slightly expanded or prematurely ended, but 100 years remained essentially the max. Similarly, it was hardly conceivable that human beings would drain a sea or that they would be able to lay a mountain low. But of course, today we know that these timescales are all mixed up. We live in a time when human beings have become the most powerful agents of environmental change across all of planet Earth. Environmental time can move faster than a human lifespan. Also, actions taken by humans today, which change the very chemistry of our atmosphere or the nature of the rock layer below our feet, will have consequences reaching far into the future, long after our states, our nations, and our civilizations have gone. So I wanted to show these ideas of time, as abstract as they may be, which are important for historians, because I think they may be useful for environmental peace builders. In any given conflict, it may be useful to assess the different time horizons that have shaped the material and ideological conflicts at play. There's always a certain asymmetry in conflict, and it might be useful to track different understandings of time at play for one group of people or stakeholders versus another. And these will always also intersect with in complex ways with the timescales of the land and of other environmental factors that are relevant. Finally, to conclude, I think it's worth noting that in a time of extraordinary environmental upheaval across the planet, and indeed within the Earth system itself, the very sort of nature of our global environment, peace building in all contexts should be aware that the future will be characterized not by environmental stability, but by instability. And Sylvia alluded to this already. Moments of past stability, therefore, may not actually be that useful as examples to draw upon. And moreover, in our globalized context, it may also be worth remembering that just as no conflict is ever truly local, neither is any environmental matter. It might therefore be worthwhile to consider the greater number of environmental factors that might at first blush appear relevant. So in all of these areas, the complex and multifaceted ways that historians think about time, I'd like to at least posit might be useful resources for environmental peace building. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ben. We're moving to Arthur.
Good to see you all, and glad to have a chance to listen and learn from my colleagues. So I'm going to talk a little bit about conflict resolution and peace building and some direct ways of connecting with environmental work. In particular, I'll summarize some work that I did with my colleague Susan Allen at the school with environmental activists in and throughout Appalachia. As my colleagues have pointed out, environmental issues are complex. I mean, if we look at something like global climate change, we maybe see that in the extreme. To engage in that work, you need different actors, people who are engaging across levels, everything from being able to understand weather patterns to how communities safeguard resources and can show resilience in moving locations and surviving the impacts of this. And so the networks of people who are working to try to counteract environmental issues are also really complex, and trying to leverage power, often with really powerful entities, corporations and others who are benefiting from these kind of processes that are reaping these kind of negative impacts on people across the globe. And so we looked just at Appalachia in the United States and looked at activist networks there who are doing work to try to end mountaintop mining, mountaintop blasting for coal. And what we found there is that there was a real need for conflict resolution skills and processes in those networks. That is in part because the networks, and the networks there have been functioning for several decades. These networks are complex. They're geographically disparate. It's a mountainous region. But then just also because people are working across a wide range of areas. Some people are doing policy work, others are doing nonviolent direct action, others are trying to create transitions economically in the Appalachia, which has been really focused largely on resource extraction. And for those of you who are engaged in conflict resolution work at an organizational level, you know how complex it can be working with an organization, and organizations will have more bounded, clear roles and responsibilities where networks are shifting and they're dynamic, and so therefore a variety of issues come up. So we did 6 months of kind of pre-work, interviewing different activists, finding out what conflicts they had within their networks. What were the issues? Did they feel they were working collaboratively? What did they see as the impediments to working collaboratively? And many issues came up that were of concern. That included competition for financial resources, a need for greater diversity of people within the network, a silencing of some groups like youth and new people who are involved in the movement, and many other issues. And so what we did was create some opportunities for people to come together in place workshops and try to kind of think about those issues and to understand what each other was doing. And so I just will talk a little bit about a couple aspects of the power of metaphor, drawing from some of the language that they used. People talked about within the movement extractive dynamics, not just as a dynamic in which people removed coal from the earth in highly destructive ways, but as a dynamic that came up in the organizing process itself. Some people talked about what they described as the dancing hillbilly tour. This is where people would be kind of picked up across Appalachia who had lost loved ones, who had died early because of cancer, because of environmental impacts, and brought family members to DC to kind of tell their stories. And then in a very short time period, were kind of brought back and didn't hear much from those people who they had worked with. As an example, they talked about extractive resources and what they described as big green. large national and international green activist organizations that had loose connections to the movement, but weren't always around after the fact, or where there were gaps in their communication and support, and different kind of logics around how they thought social change would happen. So we also used the notion of an ecosystem to try to get people to understand what each other was doing, and to see where their work could be better integrated, and where there were kind of conflicts or ways they were disrupting their work across areas. And that we kind of called ecosystems of action. And so we organized people in these workshops into what we called these ecosystems of action. People were doing policy work, people were doing other kinds of work, and had them talk amongst each other about, what where the communication frameworks were, what some of the conflicts were, areas where they could collaborate more, and then also speak to people who are in other parts of the movement about, one of the questions we asked was, what is something that people who are working outside of that ecosystem of action do that they don't even realize is disruptive to the work that you're trying to do? And so activists reported that this was really helpful. They wanted to have a follow-up workshop to continue to do some of the strategic work, and felt that it had created some pathways for communication and better functioning. So I think as we look at this environmental area through the lens of a kind of conflict resolution first type perspective, and we think about activists and advocates who are trying to address these deep power imbalances, they too are trying to leverage power in making these changes, and they face their own conflicts. And outside of that ability to kind of self-correct and to continually re-engage with complexity and change alliances and strategies, and deal with forming collaborative relationships with very different and highly complex logics of change at place, these spaces create spaces which are rife with conflict, and also where there's a real good opportunity to do internal and reflective work to support these networks in being more effective. So that's one area I wanted to highlight, that is where conflict resolution skills and analytical frameworks can help in kind of influencing and maybe making more effective environmental change work, following those people who are already in the lead in that space, and working on the stuff that we know about, which is relational, organizational, and power dynamics. So just for a couple more minutes, I'll just shift then to the work that we're doing in the program on urban peace building, and highlight some areas that we are see as important. Well, one is obviously that cities are under incredible environmental stressors as well. We see this all over the world. Maybe some of you saw that Mexico City was a matter of weeks or months away from running out of water. We know that people of color and people who are living in poverty face the most extreme impacts of climate change, of environmental pollution, and cities that have a car-centric approach, microparticulate pollution, and straight up risk in terms of traffic fatalities is greatly elevated in these communities. And so we can't really look at urban peace building without thinking about the environmental component, not to mention that the majority of people on the planet are living and will live in cities, and one big driver of people moving and migration and expansion of cities are environmental factors. On the flip side, constructively, we see that cities are starting to develop imperfect but more holistic approaches to at least mitigation and responding to environmental emergencies, and even thinking about prevention. And I think we have a lot to learn there in terms of thinking about more holistic approaches. Cities in the US now have a heat emergency infrastructure, full-time people who are kind of tasked with those roles. They're creating physical spaces for people to be able to gather, and cooling centers, and even programming around environmental education. And so even when we look at a more reactive or mitigating type approach, we can learn both from the infrastructure that's being built, but also in kind of a dual purposing of some of those spaces. So if you have a space that's earmarked for environmental emergencies, and it's literally a physical space, that space could also, in a regular basis, turn as a place for young people who are at risk of participating in violence or being victimized by violence to go and use those spaces? How can we use the resources that are being kind of applied to thinking about environmental issues and responding to environmental issues to also think about and respond to violence prevention initiatives? So I think we have some natural allies there in thinking about what we're most focused on at the center, which is really at the program, which is city-wide approaches to violence prevention and peace building. So not only just programmatic and highly fragmented and localized approaches, but how do we bring people together for citywide approaches? And I think in some ways, the environmental justice and environmental components within cities in the US at least are sometimes a bit more advanced in having a citywide approach than we are in the violence prevention space.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we move to Jeff.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And I'm going to sort of take a bit more of a macro view of this, and I want to talk a little bit about sort of the intersection between conflict resolution in a broad sense, peace building, and environmental issues. And I want to start by going back to about 15 years or so when I was head of education and training at the U.S. Institute of Peace, in which we were looking at sort of drivers of conflict as a way to sort of bridge conflict resolution in peace building. The way in which at that time we looked at environmental issues, the way we looked at climate change, the way we looked at desertification, the way we looked at environmental degradation was very much as an exacerbating factor or potentially as a trigger for conflict, but not directly as a driver of conflict. And one of the things that I think we found very much so in the last decade is that that's really significantly changed. And what I mean by that is that the link between climate change and conflict is increasingly at the forefront of not only security discussions or development discussions, but also about the intersection between conflict, violence, and environmental degradation. And this really exists almost anywhere in the world. And I think, as Sylvia noted, there's an emerging environmental peace building lens or an environmental sensitivity that is increasingly sort of having an impact or is being used in how we understand the relationship between environment and conflict. It's also critically important because, as Arthur was talking about, the importance of models and different capacities to create environmental solutions, one of the real drivers of conflict is weakness of governments or weakness of regimes to be able to cope with challenges within a society, whether it's environmental, whether it's political, whether it's justice, and increasingly environmental. Running out of water or an elevation of the seas or environmental degradation really puts great stress on the capacity of states to be able to respond to the impact of environmental damage, but also the needs of the people in those societies as a result of the environmental damage that is increasingly occurring. We can look at specific places in which, in say, Sahelian Africa, or if we look at Sudan in the case of Darfur, the environmental, particularly desertification, the environmental challenges that exist in those countries, in those societies, have not just become drivers of conflict, but they have exposed and created challenges that governments have not been able to respond to. That has led to insecurity, it's led to food insecurity, it's led to conflicts between farmers and herders, and it's led to conflicts over land and resources, particularly because arable land becomes more and more dear because there's less and less of it. So when we think about environmental issues, it's also important to think about how the correlation between environmental damage and, say, the rise of violent extremism. And that's been an issue in a number of the Francophone countries in the Sahel region, but it's increasingly beginning to spread and move into, say, coastal West Africa, in places like Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, etc. So, so part of what we are looking for in the broader peace building realm is how to bring environmental factors into how we understand the connections between threats and potential violence and conflict in such societies. Populations in societies that are affected by environmental risk have less and less capability of adapting to environmental hardships. One example that we don't often think about is that the beginning of the Arab Spring was triggered in part by a rise in prices on food, particularly basic foodstuffs such as bread. I've lived in Egypt for 5 years, and I can assure you that the strongest trigger of riots and violence when I lived in Egypt were rises in bread prices. Literally, there would be bread riots. The rise in prices of foodstuffs in Tunisia created a situation that ultimately exploded around both corruption and rising basic food prices. Many economists and agrarians argue that in part that was triggered by climate issues in Ukraine and Russia that greatly depressed the wheat markets there. And so therefore, there was a triggering rise in prices in the Middle East on basic foodstuffs necessary for bread production. Many of these countries were not able to meet their own demand, meet their own needs agriculturally. So what's important in the broader sense is to see the connections between the local and the international, and that essentially that it is going to be critical to bring an environmental lens and an environmental sensitivity to our understanding of local and regional conflicts, just as we've looked at over the years economic factors, social well-being factors, governance, security, etc. So essentially, I just want to end with the importance increasingly in a recognition, both by policymakers, but also practitioners and scholars, of these critical intersections between environment and conflict. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jeff. It's already a lot of complexities of environmental peace building introduced by our panelists. I will just bring one more dimension and one more complexity into it. The whole idea that a lot of conflicts related to environmental issue and climate change are also identity-based conflicts. And it's very important to understand that in many cases, we have a conflicts which occur between groups, and because of environmental pressures, because of climate change pressures, conflict transfers into identity-based conflict. And I will give examples where people are not actually fighting or addressing issues of environmental change or environmental issues or climate change, but rather see each other as representative of different groups engaging in violence around this particular issue. And in this case, contact and the contact theory, which is the key for social psychology, but also it's basically foundation for multiple peace building and developmental programs, also used as a tool in addressing such particular conflicts in a different way. So I will speak about examples of 3 projects I'm working on right now, from projects where it's really produced by climate change to the where peace building and contact theory and understanding of identity dynamics actually help to address this, to the projects where climate change create some power dynamics and identity dynamics which require skills of conflict resolution to peace building, to the projects where actually environmental issues are used to develop peace building and empower people. So this dimension 3 ideas. And I will start first with the project in Benin, which actually Jeff just touched a little bit, conflict between farmers and herders. And what we see in this process is that climate change, reduction of the land use, lead to conflict between these 2 groups. And conflict actually should be, right, about the land use, and conversation should be about land use. But no, because majority, really huge majority of herders are Muslim and majority of farmers are Christians, entire conflict transfer into religious identity-based conflicts. And people do not talk to each other, violence occur, there are a lot of misunderstandings because conflict perceived as religious conflict. So again, this is what happens. And as soon as identity introduces the dynamic of conflicts, it's changed completely. So addressing that does not require only ideas how you manage the land and how you find the shared patterns of land use, but also how you actually reduce already existing religious dynamics between these 2 groups. And in this project, again, using contact theory and identity-based approach to contact theory, we're working to help them to, for example, first of all, use the idea of identity work. Understand how identity impact positions, how identity impact views. In conflict dynamics, where as soon as identity is introduced, it changes how people see the world. If you alone and you see yourself as the person. You have your own views, position, ideas. You see environmental issues. You see the issues related to climate change and so on. But are you protected in this situation? You are not. So what happens that you need support of the group, which will help you to protect you in this competition over land. But as soon as you enter group, you have to pay for it. You have to pay with the loyalty. And loyalty means that you accept group positions, values, beliefs, and ideas, and you start thinking as a group member. And the most important identity, which is so visible, what we call accessibility fit, when this is the most accessible identity. Look, they're doing it because they're Christians, they're doing it as a. So understanding of this identity, this deep identity work, this is the one which we are helping to implement in this project. Another very interesting approach, gateway groups. Then we're introducing people who actually have a both mix of both, for example, Muslim farmers, those who possess identity of being Muslim, but also the position of being a farmer. And this helped to break this perception that it's religious conflict rather than it's conflict over land. And we also see other approaches, how you can understand conflict dynamics based on it. So this is one type of the project where we can helping on environmental issue. Another project which somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, it's a project in Fiji, where 40 communities earmarked by the government for relocation because of the rise of ocean level or because of increasing flooding. And in this case, because government need to relocate these communities, and according to special procedures which they developed, they require from 60 to 90% agreement between community. Dialogues have to be introduced as an important tool. So dialogues between community members and government officials. Yes, normal tool, people engage. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for so many issues. There are so many problems where communities are not heard, government officials are not really heard too. And again, we're introducing multiple tools, how to help people in Fiji to really develop these dialogues, tools which come from identity knowledge, knowledge of contact theory. And in this particular work, for example, idea of storytelling from the community, representing different perspective. What happening is usually community, because of the power dynamics, community representatives represent their own voice, or voice of people in power, or microdynamics of identity and power in communities really impact which voices are represented. So we really helping community representatives and empower them, actually increase their motivation to represent various voices, excluded voices, for example, LGBT groups, people with disabilities, young women in communities, which also have their own concern about relocation. They have, so that it will be more open for presentation. But perspective taken also, it's dual process. It's not just government have to take perspective of their local communities. Local communities have to take perspective of the government regarding relocation, because government dealing with 40 communities. So it's very important sometimes we forget in this work, concentrating on the perspective of communities, understand limitations and problems with government. So which lead us to this bridging language barriers, where people have different meaning and different perspective of how you describe the conflict itself. So this is another type. Again, we have more recommendations working with that. And I move finally to the projects in two projects in Kyrgyzstan, where actually environmental concern used for peace building reasons, and there we're working with several organizations which actually using waste management to improve relations within the family, empower women because of the social, religious, and gender norms in communities, and also bring together government, local government, and communities to improve participation and engagement in local governments. And in this case, waste management is very important because there are like so much misunderstanding, people hiding their waste, people disposing their waste in places where there is a lot of problems. Yes, it does help waste management a lot, and it does address a lot of environmental issues. But really the goal of it is really improve local governments, empower women, empower their participation, address religious and gender norm society. So these 3 projects, again, we're working with them and helping to address this issue. So you see this continuum of projects showing how our knowledge of identity, of contact, intergroup dynamics is essential for addressing issues related to environmental peace building. I will stop here because we can talk, right? Each of us can talk forever. So I now will have want to give opportunity for every presenter, because we don't have for specific reason, we don't have a discussant because it's a conversation. We do one more round the same way. Just please use 2-3 minutes, no more. Be very precise. Your impression of what you see in that, maybe some issues you see, or maybe some ideas you see about environmental peace building. And we start with Sylvia again.
Well, thank you so much. Well, this has been a lot of information, and I think it already captures so well the different directions in which environmental peace building can go. So thank you so much to all of you for sharing your different perspectives and work on this. I want to take take up 2 things. First of all, very briefly, I think what Ben said at the very beginning about pointing us towards methodology. I think that was a really important point that I just want to mention again and underline. Historical methods, and I just want to add also spatial methods, I think, and we can also go further to add even more. I think are really important to understand the breadth of what environmental peace building can look like, because as you also said, Ben, peace is time specific or has a time specific meaning, but also a space specific or place specific meaning, and the same goes for the environment. And so I think with looking at the environment and peace together, I think it's even more important to really recognize and employ different methods and work trans or interdisciplinarily. Now, the other point that I wanted to mention that both Arthur and then also Jeff mentioned or alluded to it in various ways is thinking about the local, regional, and global processes and actors that are involved in both peace building, this we already know, but also in environmental transition processes, right? And this I think quite nicely relates to this idea of multi-scalar peace building, but also like the various frictions that can arise when different scales and actors work together, right? And so as Arthur, as you said, urban and environmental peace building is not parallel or perhaps even opposed. On the contrary, right? It's coming together. It's overlapping work, and so we shouldn't treat like the urban and then the environment something that's happening outside the cities, right? On the contrary, I think it's quite nicely connected here as well. So, and thinking about frictions in this context, I think is a very fruitful avenue. The last thing I wanted to say, if I still have half a minute, and I think this came up in all our inputs, is on the one hand, what Jeff said, that there's not necessarily a direct causation, but there are pathways between what links the environment and conflict. And then, so this is, I think, one bucket, perhaps we could say, where environmental peace building research can advance. Now, the other thing is that what Karina mentioned is the idea of environmental cooperation, right, as a pathway towards perhaps intergroup relation building and essentially peace building in the end. And the last, perhaps like dimension to that I would like to add is to think also about the responses to environmental change, environmental management and climate change responses that in themselves also can create new conflict, and that also could or should be part of when we think about the different aspects that environmental peace building can take. There's so much more I could say, but I'll just stop here and leave it for the next round. So again, thank you so much for all these very interesting inputs of yours.
Thank you, Sylvia. Ben?
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks to my fellow panelists. I've learned so much this morning. I've been taking notes furiously. I think what I want to highlight in my brief comment now is one of the sort of commonalities that I saw emerge across the presentations, which namely has to do with complexity and the fundamental challenge of figuring out how to deal with something as complicated as the environment, which, as Sylvia noted, has all kinds of overlapping, cascading, multi-scalar, temporal and spatial dimensions. I think it was very helpful framing from Jeff to help us understand how over the last years the environment has been making a kind of intellectual migration within peace and conflict sort of attuned circles from something that was at one time seen as an exacerbating factor or a trigger factor to something that's now understood as, at least in some cases, central to both what conflict is and why it happens, and also to any kind of resolution process for many conflicts that we study. And so that raises a kind of problem, which is that anytime that you bring more disciplines together, anytime that you introduce new factors, there's new actors that you need to think about, new groups that become stakeholders. And so it becomes a kind of the increasing complexity becomes a kind of problem. How do you actually build peace when what's happening here is that the problems seem to be increasingly unstable and multifaceted, and you can push them in any different direction, and they have dimensions that go farther back in time or farther away in space. And so I just wanted to say that I think that one of the really interesting things that I heard emerging across the panel was not only about introducing complexity into our understanding of what peace and conflict resolution is and can be, but also really interesting cases of strategic simplification and the ability to kind of cut through that complexity and find solutions. So I really appreciated the specific strategies that were communicated by Arthur in relation to urban peace building and to the anti-mountaintop removal, mining, protests and activism in West Virginia and other parts of Appalachia. I was really interested in the particular case studies involving Benin and Kyrgyzstan and Fiji from Karina. I'd also love to hear more about, Sylvia, what you're doing in Morocco and your plans for future research in Virginia. And maybe one place that I'd like to just sort of end my comment is I was really interested, Sylvia, in your discussion about how in a time where climate and environmental concerns are increasingly on the minds of peace builders, including the United Nations, that you see one of the places where intervention happens as being in the kind of security realm. I think that that's a development that is by no means unique to the United Nations context, but happens in lots of places when there are disasters, natural disasters around the world. Often the sort of organizations that have the sort of most immediate capacity to deal with those are sort of security oriented, the military, the National Guard, et cetera. And I think that poses a kind of interesting challenge for environmental peace building if one of the sort of main actors is a kind of highly militarized one. So I just thought that was a really interesting point that you raised that I'd love to hear more discussion about. So thanks all again. I've learned so much from this panel so far.
Thank you very much, Arthur.
Well, great synthesis from my colleagues. I appreciate that. And yeah, I feel some inspiration and maybe freedom given the ways that you all have talked about the complexity of this work and the interrelated problems and ways in which these areas are connected. And so I think what I want to say is there's an opportunity, I think, in seeing the environmental component as a way for us in peace and conflict resolution work to think differently, maybe to think more deeply, and to seize on opportunities. And as my colleagues were talking, I was thinking that that's sort of at every level. That is to say that some of the challenges that we deal with at the core of conflict resolution and peace building are an ontological problem about a sense of profound interconnectivity, right? And obviously when you have an enemy formation, you have the largest rupture of that sense of interconnectivity. And one way we could do that is we could use contact theory. We can do work that connects people, as one example was given, and we know that there's good research that under the right conditions that can be really helpful. And the environment provides other ways of doing that. So in other words, we can see ourselves in a larger context, and we can see ourselves as codependent with and in relationship with the earth and the survival kind of systems of our planet in a way that might shift how we think about conflict, and certainly also shift how we think about time. Ben mentioned time. And so doing deep time work is really important, right? So when we shift, sometimes when people have experienced trauma at a personal level, the traumatic incident kind of colonizes our sense of time, right? It gobbles up our sense of what happened before and after. And so when we think about Earth's time and we think about the nature and time and the slow kinds of violence that are at play in environmental, in these environmental issues, but on the other side of it, just also geological time, it gives us a different way to turn the kaleidoscope, if you will, and also a way to reprocess our ethics on ethics of care and connection. I know that's in the broadest terms, but I just thought I would bring that forward. So if I were to think of a design maxim in a way for in my class today when I leave here and I'm talk about this talk, I think I'm at a point where part of what I take away is when I'm stuck, or when you're stuck in your peace building and conflict resolution work, how might you be able to shift that work to be more effective by considering the environmental component? So that is a kind of a growth maybe oriented and so gnawing in the back of my head is all the yes, and we have to deal with the problems right at the same time. So it's a both, but because you all have done such a good job of that. And then the last point, I think this was echoed, but is that the complexity requires systematic approaches. And so I think this connects back to what I said earlier, that we can again and kind of shift the kaleidoscope and see an environment first approach and see, well, how is that happening? How's that happening in, let's say, for example, the notion of a circular economy, right? A kind of holistic attempt to make sense of structures, building structures that self-reinforce sustainability. And so what is our peace building version of a circular economy, right? How do we create self-reinforcing peace building infrastructure in a way that it can have an element of where it's catalyzed across levels and produces pro-social behavior in a way that we're not, as some of my interviewees once described their restorative justice work, ambulance chasing all the time, you know, and that kind of crisis response and immediate crisis response mode. So those are my closing comments. Thank you, and appreciate what you all shared.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
I'm going to be very quick because I just want to build off the optimism that has emerged, because I was probably on the other side a bit. And that is environmental issues being at the core of a problem-solving approach to peace and conflict. I loved your examples, Karina, of Kyrgyzstan and Fiji. It brought to mind, going back a long time, that demonstrates the importance of science and expertise. In 1992, the Madrid peace process in the Middle East created 5 working groups, one of which was on the environment and one of which was on water resources. And there was some remarkable results that emerged from these groups, who began as they were groups of experts, scientists, engineers, hydrologists, desertification experts, and a number of cooperative agreements emerged as a result, a number of which are still in place today. There is an emergency plan for any environmental damage in the Gulf of Aqaba that was signed on by Jordan, Israel, Egypt, the Palestinian Authority, and has been observed by Saudi Arabia, even though they didn't sign it. One of the most important bases of the Jordan-Israel peace agreement was an annex to the agreement that focused on how they would respond and cooperate if there were any water emergencies. And that remains in place today and has been invoked once, in which Israel helped Jordan during a semi-drought period. And so my point is that these are problems that transcend some of the identity-based factors of conflict, and they become common problems that at different levels, local, regional, national, and international, we have to face collectively. And so there are examples of being able to do that. And so I think we need to, in a sense, promote and elevate those cases and examples as much as we can.
Hey, thank you very much. And it's super exciting. I really have to say that this ability of us to do a reflection on reflection, and I would like go again and again, but we have a group, few words, because I really want to open it to the audience. Then I hear this presentation, I really think about synergetic approach to the whole environmental peace building as synergetic approach itself. And the idea of that, the key of it, is that it's constituted of different parts. We hear, of course, different theoretical perspective, different methodologies. We saw fusion of practice and theory in different levels. We saw prevalence of different parts of peace building activities, or understanding environmental issue, or understanding local and global or timing perspective, eternity perspectives. And it's really helped us to understand in synergetic systems, it's actually each part not just constitute the structural part, but it's also impact how other parts are functioning. And I think this is what the most important from this environmental peace building, the most important what we bring from this session, that understanding of the value of environment bring completely different perspective and change the way how groups see their intergroup conflict. By bringing the idea of timing, really changing how we define the preferences between groups engaged in government positions, right? So there are a lot of ways how this impact of the parts of this environmental peace building as a system, it opens so many opportunities, so opens so many ways how we can address. And I always believe that new theories and new practice always born on a boundary of different fields. And this is where we see environmental peace building is so exciting, and we see so much ways here in our Carter School to progress and develop this as one part of what we are doing, is the synergy between different faculties, our students, and our wider network. So I will open it to, we have 20 minutes, so we want to open it for our patient audience. Thank you very much for being patient and listening. I know a lot of you have questions or positions. Please raise your hand. I will look your hand and I will help you to unmute, and you can ask your question, or you can write it in chat if you're interested. So Ashton.
Thank you all so much for that terrific panel presentation. I wanted to pick up a thread. I forget where it started, but heard it somewhere. I think environmental peace building is such an interesting space to be in because it constantly holds the tension between simplifying arguments so that people can really get behind them, understand them, feel like they have some agency in tackling them, while also opening a lot of space for nuance and complexity that is required in order to fully grasp how complex and nuanced these issues are. I study vehicular violence and car supremacy, and one of the things that I'm frustrated by within current discourse is this idea that electric vehicles are the panacea that will save us from the massive kind of calamity that we're expected to see with global climate change. This is, true in one sense, in that electric vehicles will eliminate tailpipe emissions, but there are a lot of other issues that come with our reliance on cars, tires, and braking systems emit pollutants. There's also wear and tear of asphalt that increases when you have increasing weights of vehicles. When you have EVs, psychologically, you might say, well, this is a green mode of transportation. I can live further from X place, and that creates cycles of sprawling development, which increases resource use, and you can see where I'm going with this. And so I, in my own work, am curious to see where there are opportunities to bring more nuance to these discussions from a peace building perspective. And I'm curious if any of you in your respective lines of work have found successful examples of peace builders striking the right balance between simplifying things for kind of mass consumption and activating kind of the inherent motivations of folks, while also bringing the required complexity to these issues so that we understand the wider systemic issues that are really at play here.
Okay, anyone wants to answer and have examples? I think, Ashton, you brought like very specific. I don't, if we remove, maybe if we remove consumption.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to
that,
make it
yes,
about car stuff. I'm trying to figure out if in your own work, you're finding ways to embrace that tension between the complex and the simple.
Yeah, I think if we like remove consumption into issue, then probably it will be easier to answer the question. And I just give you a quick idea from, for example, work in Fiji. I think there are a lot of ways would we see what, if we speak about this power dynamic, addressing power dynamic and addressing the way of misrepresentation of particular groups in these dialogues regarding the relocation. it's very important part which I see, and I was very pleased to see. I participated in several workshops run by women for women, and this part of empowerment of the women, which is great to see, but still in multiple islands, being a young woman, it's mean to be like on a very, very low level of hierarchy, right? So this idea of how to change the microdynamics of power and microdynamics of identity within each community to make it more representative, it's very important part. When you were speaking about cars, I have a different perspective on it from, again, the way. So yes, electric car requires the charging. And it's very easy for people who have individual houses or apartments with garages to have this charging stations. But again, we bring in this inequality of communities where there are no garages, where are very strong concentration of housing and very small parking spaces. And it's usually more marginalized communities, how these communities will be doing charging and so on. So there are a lot of issues related to power dynamics, which not always immediately obvious. Like remember in France, when they banned old cars from entering the city, the most affected people were the poor communities who were coming to clean in the cities and do the lower level of the work, who could not now come into it. I remember it was the whole problems in France about it. I see Jeff hand.
Yeah, thanks. I really cannot contribute to the issue of cars, but you triggered in my mind one of the important roles of peacebuilding initiatives is really to get a good understanding of how people see the issue, see the problem, reframe, define the problem. And when you mention sort of people feeling like they can drive further different distances so that communities may be developed further away, what that raises is the question of unintended consequences. And therefore, it's a key component to the development of processes of dialogue, a problem-solving approach or a transformational approach to conflict. It requires a thorough understanding and analysis of, how does a proposed solution have an impact on all stakeholders? So what you raised is a problem I don't know the ins and outs of, but peace building and conflict resolution creates the basis of a process to be able to explore what you raised.
Sylvia?
Yeah, thanks. Just like one thought perhaps, and I'm not sure it directly responds to this question of simplification versus maintaining complexity, but I think what we haven't really mentioned thus far is like the importance of thinking about knowledge, where the knowledge comes from about the environment. And related to this, I think it came up somewhat indirectly before, thinking about the environment and about nature as something that is a source of healing and of reconciliation, that has spiritual importance. And this is where it gets to indigenous knowledge, for example, right? The various ways of knowing about the environment and about environmental change processes. And I think that's, Ashton, you mentioned electric cars and being this new panacea for an identified environmental problem. I could talk about the same when we think of renewable energy and replacing carbon-based economies, and the turn towards solar that in a way creates new international global relationships of finance, of extraction that are that seem to be as harmful to local communities sometimes as what we had before. So I think it's not about, I think, simplifying. Unfortunately, I can't speak to that, but I think we need to maintain a level of complexity in order to be aware of different types of meaning and of knowledge that come into play, that perhaps we are in the institutions that we are having these conversations not necessarily so always so attuned to, perhaps. No? So more an advocacy for keeping a level of complexity here.
Yes, Ben, I see you use the real hand.
Got to introduce a little bit of reality into the Zoom platform.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say thank you for raising the issues of cars. None of us are experts on that, but I think it's a really important one. Anytime you deal with issues of power and climate, the transportation infrastructure is a really important set of questions that cross-cuts many different social layers. Just to briefly introduce my own reaction to your question about how do you deal with a complex problem like this, where there seems to be some advantage to introducing something like electric vehicles in this case, and yet they're clearly not perfect. I wanted to make a plug for conversation across disciplines, something that we've already touched on here, and also for different scales and types of research. There's real value to having sort of activists on the ground and practitioners who are responsive to real-time events. But as a historian, I'm of course also interested in the sort of long, slow processes of research that might turn up results that you wouldn't find if you're looking only 5 or 10 years into the past, but that might have a kind of deeper historical sort of structural basis. And one thing that comes to mind, just in response to your particular question, Ashton, has to do with the different ways that different disciplinary communities think about the environment and what the environment is. If you were to sort of bring together scholars who have a lot of different perspectives, you would have different answers to that question. And it seems to me that the sort of argument for electric vehicles being environmentally friendly basically comes from a perspective that suggests that, or that sees climate change as kind of the premier environmental problem of the moment. But there are, of course, lots of other disciplinary contexts or communities that see climate change as one of like a number of environmental problems that are all sort of intersecting. So the way that Earth system scientists often talk about this is to refer to the Earth system as a whole, or to refer to a kind of new epoch that we may or may not have entered, depending on who you ask, called the Anthropocene. And if you sort of look at the question of cars in general from an Anthropocene perspective, I think you would have a different orientation towards the value of cars as such versus a distinction between internal combustion engine cars or electric cars than if you sort of took climate change as the primary environmental problem that you're trying to solve.
Ben, actually, you already start answering the question from Claudio in chat, who asked what are other disciplines in addition to history can be useful for understanding on conflict resolution. So you actually already start showing how different disciplines can have not just different approach, but completely different perspective. And this is, again, which is showing one more time how environmental peace building is synergetic system, not just a system. Maybe somebody else from the panelists can also address this issue again. In the chat, Claudia asked, history was mentioned as a factor to be considered on peace building and environmental peace building. Are there any fields of studies that you think will be beneficial to start incorporating more? Yes, Sylvia.
If I can just jump in, I think from a practical perspective, also thinking about teaching and being a university, I think we will also need to talk to those that do much of the environmental management work, and these are technically and traditionally engineers that have environmental engineers and others that have experience and have been doing most of that work for a long time. And I think that often don't have the luxury to study peace building as part of their education. And so I think building bridges towards the more, let's say, technical fields, I think would be important to advance practice in environmental peace building.
Okay, Jeff or Ben, do you want to add about this more on the fields? I mean, it's definitely education, but also I think the whole idea of yes, peace education, it's also part of it. I know that for a long time they were using a lot of, for example, narrative messaging, right? Communication studies, how to send right messages to the people. A lot of studies from marketing of social norms, how you can change social norms. So there are a lot of ways how we pick and great ideas from different disciplines, and again, we probably can see more, again, it's engaging more engineering and engaging different sciences, which already is there. I think the bridging conversation between them, which is the hardest way. We just had already several meetings with engineering department and continue doing it, just bridging the interdisciplinary bridge itself, right? It's a very hard way, but this is, I think, how environmental peace building should go. At least this will be my response. And yeah,
the only thing I would add is not about disciplines. It's about making sure that we incorporate the voices of local communities with respect to how they perceive, how they frame, how they want to be heard on those issues that affect the environment in which they live. And they may, and in some cases do, frame the issues differently than maybe a researcher or a scholar or an engineer might. Indigenous practices were mentioned, but it's also important to ensure that we get that the local perspective is incorporated into approaches to environmental damage. So there's a process of co-creation as opposed to simply finding solutions that are, in a sense, kind of imposed on people.
Thank you. So there is a question, are any of the teaching courses in the fall? And Sylvia, it's a question for you and for Ben.
Shameless self-promotion here. Yes, so I'm happy to report that there will be indeed a course offered in the fall on environment, peace building, and conflict. So this will hopefully pick up many of the things that we have been discussing in this panel and dive further in throughout the semester.
So Sylvia, is it undergrad or grad course?
A graduate class, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. And Ben, are you teaching next semester?
No, I'm actually going to be on parental leave, so I will be spending time with my new daughter. But
congratulations!
Thank you so much. I'm currently teaching a class on environmental movements at the Carter School, which is a real pleasure to teach, and I'm really looking forward to bringing some of the insights of this panel to my students. So thank you all for equipping me with some new knowledge to share with some of our students.
Yeah, this is another discipline, right? Sociology of social movements. Yes, thank you very much. And please, there are several other sections which are coming in. This one already Ashton put in online, but also we will have on Thursday at 9 o'clock, I will be hosting the panel with Belmont Forum on, again, environmental peace building and approaches. Please join us at 9 o'clock on Thursday in the morning. Again, it's Belmont Forum coming as a guest to have a continued discussion on environmental peace building. We also have today at 4:30 in person and online specific section on contact theory, how to incorporate it into peace building. Also, please join. We will discuss a lot of very specific outcomes from our study of 35 projects. Thank you, everyone, for this great participation. Thank you for all our panelists, and I really happily see that we develop in this very strong hub, but maybe will grow into the center on environmental peace building at the Carter School. Thank you. Thank you, and we'll see you at other sessions. Bye-bye.